Hello and welcome. I'm Jodi Martin, the training coordinator for MVCC. Today we're going to talk about cultural competency and awareness. Just being aware. Being aware and understanding develops through conversation. Please note, today is a safe place for dialogue and conversation to better help us understand. Due to COVID, we must come together to create a different culture of learning. It is new for most of us. However, I have tried to implement hands-on activities throughout the presentation. I will refer to this handout as a handout. Today we're going to have 3 learning objectives. The first objective is to gain an understanding of cultural differences. The second one is to identify strengths and weaknesses through reflection. It will be your self-reflection. And the third one is to create a work environment that respects all views and differences. In your handout, you will see on the first page a self-awareness checklist. Just take a few minutes and identify where you fall on the checklist. The first one is value diversity. The second one is know myself. The third one is share my culture. The fourth one is check my assumptions. And the fifth one is challenge my stereotypes. And then you can identify where you fall with never, sometimes, fairly often, or always. If you turn the page in your handout, you will see a definition for cultural sensitivity. As I'm reading the script, try to identify what resonates with you and how you're feeling about cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity, broadly recognized as the knowledge, skills, and attitudes and beliefs that enable people to work well with others, respond effectively to, and be supportive of people in cross-cultural settings. Cultural sensitivity is not solely the acceptance of cultural differences, but rather a transformational process that allows individuals to acknowledge interdependence and align with a group other than their own. Culturally proficient healthcare, in particular, makes use of patients' language and culture as tools to improve outcomes for that individual. When I personally reflect on this, what stands out to me, since we're talking about dealing with a work environment of understanding culture, is the part where it says cultural sensitivity is not solely the acceptance of different cultures, but rather the transformational process, because we are constantly trying to understand why the people we work with do or say maybe the things that they do or feel the way they feel. Next, I have provided the definition of unconscious biases. Briefly, we will discuss how this impacts our awareness of cultural sensitivity. It occurs from our own experiences. Reflect for a minute. Close your eyes. You have just finished a stressful day at work. You're riding home on a subway. You sit down and you realize you're sitting next to a father and 3 children. One of the children is about 3 years old, jumping and yelling. Another child is standing, hitting his siblings. The father is gazing out the window. Where is your mind going? What are you feeling? Are you in your conscious mind or your unconscious mind? Finally, the father leans over and says, "I'm sorry. We just left the hospital. My wife, their mother, is not going to make it through the night." Did your brain just shift? Absolutely it did. Through a simple conversation, the behavior becomes more acceptable. So as we move forward in this presentation, Think about your conscious and unconscious mind. Next, some more on conscious and unconscious mind. Although behaviors tend to indicate unconsciousness forces driving them, we can readily access the information which is stored in our unconscious mind. Our unconscious mind comes from our childhood and our experiences. I'm going to read to you an excerpt from Sigmund Freud. To understand the concept, we must first look at the conscious and unconscious mind. The conscious mind is the logical, the rational side of situations. It's happening right now. Your unconscious mind is your reservoir. It's where you're holding information. Freud often compares this to an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is right now. It's your conscious mind. Under the iceberg is where your experiences are coming from, or your unconscious mind. I have provided a graph or an image of the iceberg. And if you look at that, 10% of that is your conscious mind. It's happening right now. The other 90% of that is coming from your experiences. This image is also in your handbook on page 2. The conscious mind, as I said, is memories, feelings, wishes that you're aware of right now. And when you dig deeper in your unconscious mind, it's coming from personal experiences. Your conscious mind is willpower, long-term memory, logical thinking, and critical thinking. Again, right now, how are you feeling? But when you dig deeper and you go deeper into the iceberg, it becomes your beliefs, your emotions, habits, values, protective reactions, long-term memory, your imagination, and your intuition. All of those are reservoirs of experiences. So, diversity, cultural sensitivity. Think diversity. Think about your work environment. In your handout, you will see a box with a little bubble, a cloud, because we're thinking diversity. Think about your work environment and your coworkers, and identify some groups that you experience on a daily basis. So there's 4 spots, and just think about 4 different things. If you were to classify the people you work with, what are some groups you would put them in? So just take a minute and fill out your handout. And as you're doing that, some that come to mind: religion. Maybe somebody you work with has a different religion than you. Beliefs, ethics. Maybe their personality isn't what yours is. Gender. Some are younger, some are older. Race. But you may have something else than what I have on our presentation. Now, think about your conscious mind and your unconscious mind. The 4 groups that you've identified for your workplace, is that a conscious mind or is it unconscious? So if we're going to talk about gender, age, or race, is that conscious or unconscious? After you've identified your groups of where you've put your coworkers, if it is under conscious mind, put a C. For example, if it's gender, you would put a C for conscious mind. If you've identified by different religions, you're going to put a CS for the subconscious mind or the unconscious mind. And then after you identify and you classify and you put people into groups, it becomes generalizations. And that's another part of our biases or our unbiases. Think, for example, gestures or facial expressions. Time differences. Think about that coworker that's always late to a meeting or runs in at the last minute. Religious differences. Eye contact. I have a personal story about eye contact. Before my career at MVCC, I was a summer school principal for Dayton Public Schools. I was serving in a building that had several different races, religions, cultures within one building. I'm not going to identify the race, but these children would not look at you in your eye. I did not know this particular child. He came in late. He barreled right past me, right through the office, and I'm thinking, this is a rude kid. I immediately put him in a group. I stereotyped him. I later learned that his culture doesn't make eye contact. So that was a huge learning point for me. Physical space. Some people, you feel they're invading your space. Touching. Politics, food choices, and there are several others. Now take for a moment and think back, what is one of the earliest skills you learned, or even maybe one of your children learned? It's categorizing. It's putting things in groups. It's a skill you learn before you even start kindergarten. All the green balls go together. All the small blocks go together. All the yellow crowns go together, anything yellow. So we're categorizing and putting things into groups before we even realize what we're doing. So as you move into society, you subconsciously start putting people and things into groups. Another big topic, think by show of hands if you're watching this with a group, the golden rule. Who knows the golden rule? Do unto others as you would have done to you, correct? However, it sounds great, but as we're living in a more diverse country, area, cities, the golden rule, as great as it is, has limitations. Since all people in all situations are different, when you follow the platinum rule, you can be sure you're doing what the person wants done to them. So when thinking about your work environment, anywhere when we're talking about cultural sensitivity, the platinum rule, do unto others as they would want done to them. That's a little bit of a shift from the way most of us have been brought up. Next, if you're viewing this on your own somewhere, you will go to a YouTube link and watch a video. And as you're watching the YouTube video, there's 4 questions that I need for you to lock in your mind somewhere. They're also in your handout that's been provided. The first one, the video talks about single stories, and it's very interesting. But think about an example within your work environment, this would be after you view the video, of a single story. The second one is think of single stories that you see on the news. The third one is during the video, the girl talking, her name is Adachi, talks about single stories and how they're dangerous. So as you're watching the video, look for that. And how might we reject the single story in our own lives to regain a so-called paradise? So when you're watching the video, keep those in your mind so you can go back and answer them or talk or discuss them with somebody that you're sitting next to. As you watch the video, and Adachi is telling her single story of the United States and coming to the United States, she herself talks about a single story of when she went to Mexico, would be one of her single stories. Another single story that was against her was when her roommate asked what kind of music she liked, and she says she likes Mariah Carey. Her roommate wanted to hear her so-called tribal music. So if you reflect back on that, both cultures had single stories of someone or something else. Another point that she makes during her speech is stereotypes. And I think this is a really powerful statement. She says when you make a stereotype, it's not necessarily untrue of how you feel or what you see, but the story is incomplete. So that's where cultural sensitivity or awareness comes in. And if you reflect back to riding home on a subway, you immediately made a stereotype about those children. You probably thought they were unruly, they were out of control in some sort. But as soon as you got the complete story, it changed your stereotype of the situation. So That was a really powerful point that she made when you're talking about stereotypes. It's not that it's necessarily untrue, it's just not complete. And then another interesting point she makes, and I think this could reflect when you're watching the news, any news, our news in America, world news, anywhere. When you show the same story over and over again, that becomes that culture's story or that situation story, but that's one story creating that in your mind. So after viewing the video, these are just some points to put in place because it opens your perspective and it makes you more culturally aware. And it also makes you aware that no matter what culture you're coming from, everybody has a perspective or they're placing a single story or a stereotype on someone. Are you culturally competent? These are some things to take in with you as you leave, just to reflect on and revisit. It's an ongoing assessment. You constantly have to reevaluate where you are and take the information and make commitments with it. Model attitudes, behaviors, decisions, and policies. Use your data. If we're talking cities and you're trying to understand what cultures are within your cities, start with the schools. They're going to have everything broken down specifically. Distribute your power. When you're talking about a workforce, we all come with different values and different strengths. So identify whose strengths are what and give them certain power so everybody feels needed and appreciated and part of your team or your work group. And be courageous in conversation. A lot of times we're surface, but to be courageous in conversation, you go below that surface and you really dig in to understand why somebody is behaving how they are or why they're doing what they're doing. So it's just be courageous in conversation. Next part of self-assessment is value diversity. How do you know? Does the value show up in your practices, your principles, and who you serve? Dig deeper. Engage in self-reflection. That's what I've spoken on a lot. Just engage in yourself. What are you doing to make adjustments to understand? Manage the dynamics of difference. Again, knowing the strengths and what your coworkers are bringing to the table will help you reflect in the dynamics of managing the differences. And just remember what strategies are in place in your teams, in your departments, in your cities to help understand this so you can work and thrive better together. Adopt a culture context to the cities and communities that you serve. So again, going to the schools, going to community resource centers and understanding what your city is just even made up in will help you be able to serve your city better. Reflect back. In the beginning, we showed and talked about the definition of cultural sensitivity. How does this definition reflect your current practices now that you've opened up your minds hopefully a little bit to some cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity? And just take a minute, and if you want to discuss at your tables or if you're with a group, how have you changed or shifted in your awarenesses of cultural sensitivity? And in the beginning, you were given, it's in your handout, a self-awareness checklist. As you reflect back over that, have you changed anywhere where you originally thought maybe you were before the presentation? Again, it's all about reflection and self-reflection to grow. I have provided some training resources. They are also in your handout that you have. Again, if you just YouTube cultural sensitivity, cultural competency on your own, tons and tons and tons of information will come up, but I've just provided you with a few links. Also within your teams, within your cities, within your departments, building professional learning communities where this becomes a safe zone, something that you can continuously talk about to grow, because cities, dynamics, things are constantly changing. And as we end and we close, just remember, we are now in a global village and we are one single family. It's our responsibility to bring friendship and love from all different places around the world to live together in peace. I always like to end with a quote because I feel like it pulls it all together. Also, in your handout at the bottom is a link. If you have time, it's providing a survey. So if you have time, please take that. I hope your time today with a journey through cultural sensitivity and awareness was beneficial. I am Jodi Martin, the training coordinator for MVCC. Thank you.